Zimbabwe President Robert Mugabe and his family are detained by the military. A military spokesman says it is not a coup. We'll have a live report. The acting Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of African Affairs on the objective of the meeting with African foreign ministers and the African Union in Washington. And an American Olympian inspires the first ever hijab-wearing Barbie. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. We begin tonight in Southern Africa, where Zimbabwe's military seized power early Wednesday, saying it was targeting criminals around President Robert Mugabe, the only ruler the country has known in its 37 years of independence. After nearly 4 decades in office, President Mugabe may have finally gone too far in firing his vice president and positioning his wife to succeed him. Zimbabwe's military says it is not carrying out a military takeover of the government and that both Mugabe and his family are safe. A Defense Force spokesperson says they are focusing on individuals who are attempting to create havoc.
We are only targeting criminals around him who are committing crimes that are causing social and economic suffering in the country in order to bring them to justice. As soon as we have accomplished our mission, we expect that the situation will return to normalcy.
Now, there are witness reports of at least 3 explosions and heavy gunfire in the capital city of Harare early Wednesday. The military is encouraging the public to restrict their travel unless necessary. The U.S. Embassy warned American citizens via its website to shelter in their residences and work from home on Wednesday. Now, this political crisis was triggered last week when Mugabe fired his deputy Emerson Mnangagwa and accused him of disloyalty and plotting to seize power. For more on this unfolding situation in Zimbabwe, I'm joined by 2 VOA reporters. First, let's go to Johannesburg in South Africa, where we meet Anita Powell, our Southern Africa correspondent. Anita, good to see you. First, just let us get your perspective from where you're standing. Is there a military coup in Zimbabwe?
Well, I suppose, Vincent, in this era of alternative facts, you can call it whatever you want. The Zimbabwe Military Veterans Association called it a bloodless correction. But there's some facts here. The military went through the capital on Tuesday night. They took over the TV station, and we're now looking at a situation where the leader of the country is under house arrest and Zimbabwe may face a change in leadership without an election or a natural event such as the death of a leader. So you can call it whatever you like, but what does that look like to you? That analysts are saying that has the makings of a coup.
Mm-hmm. What do we know about, especially the wife of the president, Grace Mugabe? There are rumors floating around that she might actually not be in that house.
Right. So there were reports that she was in Namibia, neighboring Namibia, and Namibia's foreign minister shut that down in local media and said, no, that's not true. She is not. Her whereabouts are, nobody really knows where she is, but the military has said that the Mugabe family is in their custody.
Yeah, and now we know what the African Union stance is on coups and even the regional bodies like ECOWAS. What has been the reaction in that region up to this point?
So I think what's really interesting is that the reaction from Southern Africa has been, condemnation of unconstitutional changes for government, calls for calm. But the difference here is that Mugabe is still a very big figure in this region. He's an iconic figure. He's an independence hero, but also he is a man who speaks his mind. He holds grudges and he lives in the neighborhood. So Southern African governments, notably South Africa and Namibia, have been very careful to say, we condemn unconstitutional changes of government. But unlike, for example, Britain's Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, they are drawing the line at condemning any individuals like, say, Robert Mugabe.
Mm-hmm. Now, very quickly, we would like also to know, what are those Zimbabweans who have lived in South Africa for many years saying? What has been their response or reaction to this?
Well, a lot of the Zimbabweans living in South Africa left because of the political troubles in Zimbabwe and also the economic problems in Zimbabwe. So I think a change of government has been widely welcomed here. But I think what's important to remember is that Emmerson Mnangagwa is not a new kid on the block. He is, and was for many years, a close crony of Robert Mugabe. So I think a lot of Zimbabweans are also saying, wait a minute, what's really changing here?
Well, Anita, we'll find out a bit more what's really changing in Harare. Thanks a lot for joining us today. And now here, that's Anita Powell, a VOA correspondent in Southern Africa, joined us via Skype from Johannesburg. Now, for more perspective on the crisis, I'm joined by VOA Zimbabwe reporter Blessing Zulu. Hey, Blessing.
Hi,
becoming a regular.
Thank you so much.
So first, what is the mood inside Zimbabwe? You've been talking to people there. What's going on?
I think, the problem is that Mr. Mugabe has been in power for quite a long time, and many Zimbabweans, even as it was happening, were reporting minute by minute, we're calling people, they were not even aware, and some were, even up to now, still skeptical. And, the situation in most parts of the country is calm, but it remains very tense.
Yeah. Well, Mugabe is larger than life in Zimbabwe. But from what you're hearing, what is the game plan here by the military? They say, this is not a coup. We just want to take care of some criminals. Who are the criminals, and then what after that?
Unfortunately, if you go by what they've been saying, the criminals might as well include the First Lady, because they are saying she is one of those people who were influencing Mr. Mugabe to make bad decisions. So they have arrested or they've actually detained some of these people that they are calling the criminals. You have the Finance Minister, Ignatius Chombo. We also understand that the Police Commissioner is being detained, Augustine Chiuri. The Minister of Local Government, Sevia Kasukwere, Higher Education Minister, Jonathan Moyo, and Mr. Mugabe's nephew, Patrick Joao, is also under house arrest. But I think, like many analysts are saying, it is a coup.
Yeah, well, we know that Jonathan Moyo was calling this a fake news. I don't know under house arrest what he thinks now. But in terms of the ousted Vice President Emmerson Mnangagwa, where is he now? Do we know anything about it?
We know there are some reports that he's in South Africa, and others are saying he was never in South Africa. He was actually always in Zimbabwe. But we know that the Army General who staged this coup, General Constantino Chiwenga, is a close ally of Mnangagwa. So what we understand now is that since they've put Mr. Mugabe under house arrest, they are trying to negotiate with him to step down in order to pave way for Mnangagwa ahead of the ZANU-PF Congress in December, which makes it very interesting because some were saying maybe there will be a transitional government. They will invite opposition leaders like Morgan Tsvangirai and others. But I think there is confusion, amongst the coup plotters on the way forward. Some are just saying, let's have Mnangagwa. Others are saying, let's include other players. So it's a fluid situation.
So we'll watch and see, because at the end of the day, some of the big wigs in the party and those in the military are kind of comrades. These are fellows who've been working together. So it's still a ZANU-PF affair. So we'll just watch and see whether they will kind of invite the opposition. Be sure you'll be back here.
Indeed. Is it our fault?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vincent.
That's VOA Zimbabwe reporter Blessing Zulu. Now, after nearly 40 years in power, 93-year-old Robert Mugabe's autocratic tenure as president of Zimbabwe may be over after his once loyal military seized control of the state-owned television network, placed the long-term ruler and his wife in custody, and surrounded parliament. VOA's Richard Green has more on the role of a man once hailed around the world as a revolutionary freedom fighter.
Born in 1924 in what was then called Rhodesia, Mugabe's rise to power began in 1974, when he was released from prison after serving 10 years for subversion. The scholar and former school teacher became the leader of a prolonged guerrilla war against white minority rule.
There is no shortcut. To be the leader of the people. Just as there was no shortcut to our independence. We had to walk the long walk.
His efforts bore fruit in 1980, when he became Prime Minister of the newly independent nation of Zimbabwe. Praised in the early years of his rule for his pragmatic approach to governing, Mugabe steadily began consolidating power over the next decade, launching a brutal crackdown on opponents that led to the deaths of thousands of Zimbabweans. Mugabe's decision to seize land from white farmers transformed Zimbabwe from the economic breadbasket of Africa to the continent's economic basket case, complete with triple-digit inflation, mass unemployment, and worthless currency. Mugabe solidified his hold on power in 2008 when his loss to opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai in the first round of presidential elections led to political violence against Tsvangirai's supporters, forcing Tsvangirai to withdraw from the runoff vote. By the time he won re-election in 2012, Zimbabwe had become an international pariah, and Mugabe was considered as just another of the African continent's big men, autocratic leaders whose rule was tainted by corruption, economic waste, and intolerance of dissent. Richard Green, VOA News, Washington.
Well, for an in-depth discussion on the Zimbabwe political crisis, be sure to watch VOA Straight Talk Africa with host Chaka Sali. It's coming up in about 90 minutes. To East Africa now, Kenya's Supreme Court ruled on Wednesday that the country's election board must give access to election returns to parties challenging President Uhuru Kenyatta's victory in last month's presidential election. Access to the original vote tally forms and a copy of the voter registry must immediately be granted to the petitioners. However, they denied a request for access to the electronic devices used in vote counting. The legal challenges come after the court nullified Kenyatta's August victory and ordered a new election, an unprecedented move in Africa. The current proceedings may be the last chance for legal scrutiny of the second election held on October 26th. After Wednesday's ruling, lawyers for the petitioners began presenting their cases, arguing the poll's outcome is void because the election board did not hold fresh nominations after the earlier poll was invalidated, among other reasons. Now, Kenyan opposition leader Raila Odinga has wrapped up a week-long visit to the United States, where he warned that his country's political impasse could have serious consequences beyond its borders. Odinga says instability at home poses a risk to foreign investment and threatens Western allies. Africa 54's Haiti Adams Fitzpatrick has more.
Odinga was anything but vague on his visit to Washington, reminding the United States that peace and progress in Kenya are of strategic significance. He criticized the role of Western diplomats in Kenya's October election rerun, accusing them of siding with President Uhuru Kenyatta.
The envoy's efforts up to now have not succeeded in diffusing the crisis. But let me be blunt again. They have sometimes contributed to the problem.
Odinga contends that Western backing for President Kenyatta will backfire.
The world must not be deceived that this is merely an electoral crisis triggered by the third straight rigged election. The crisis is all-encompassing and has resulted from the attempt to unlawfully hold on to power.
Raila Odinga had stern words for the United States, accusing Washington and what he calls Kenya's other pro-democracy friends of turning a blind eye to the electoral crisis unfolding in his country. He urged Washington to do more, saying an economically and politically stable Kenya is in the interest of the entire international community. Kenya is a solid Western ally in a region often shaken by violence, contributing more than 3,600 troops to the fight against Al-Shabaab in Somalia. More than 900 Kenyans have been killed in terror attacks since 2000. Odinga warns the electoral crisis will make things worse.
As things stand now, anger and radicalization is growing by the day. And unless this election crisis is expeditiously ratified, Kenya could be rendered incapable of protecting its own and its partners' fundamental interests.
Odinga is calling for a 6-month interim government and new elections. That's touched off a fresh political storm at home. In Washington, this Odinga supporter is cautious.
But the majority of Kenya wants what is best for Kenya, which is peace, justice first, because before you can have peace, you have to have justice. So everybody has to make sure that they're heard of.
But it's unclear now that Kenya's election rerun is over and Odinga isn't president, whether his warnings of trouble ahead for East Africa's largest economy will be heard. Hayley Adams-Fitzpatrick, VOA News, Washington.
Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Now, coming up, the AU and African foreign ministers meet with top officials in Washington. Stay with us.
My name's Carla Babb, and I work the Pentagon beat. That access helps me to do better stories. Every day it's my responsibility to collect all of the defense news. It keeps our VOA viewers informed. I get to travel all across the globe. Anything that's defense related and how to protect and keep people safe, that's where I'll go. So it's never a dull moment at the Pentagon. My name is Carla Babb. This is my beat.
Well, in Wednesday's business report, cryptocurrency is becoming more a reality for some countries in Africa as a way to combat hyperinflation and for use as an online currency. Here's Africa 54 business correspondent Jill Malandrino reporting from the NASDAQ market site in New York.
For most investors around the world, Bitcoin is a volatile, highly speculative bet and largely misunderstood. For countries like Zimbabwe, however, the cryptocurrency seems to offer rare protection from the onset of hyperinflation and financial implosion. Some are turning to Bitcoin out of desperation as their bank deposits lose value almost by the day, while others are using the online currency for housekeeping, such as funding family members studying abroad. Let's take a look at the local banking issues. The government adopted the US dollar in 2009 after a bout of hyperinflation rendered the Zimbabwean dollar worthless, wiping out savings and now defunct national currency. After a period of relative stability, acute shortages of dollar cash have set in, leaving Zimbabweans with electronic units in their bank accounts, which are officially called dollars, but have a far lower and rapidly decreasing value. With Bitcoin in Zimbabwe now, you can bypass the need to seek foreign currency from the bank and can even buy goods and services from the growing number of overseas merchants that accept the digital currency. Globally, the value of all cryptocurrencies is more than 170 billion, and Bitcoin, the biggest and best known, has outperformed all traditional currencies every year since 2011, except for 2014. Now, Bitcoin in the local Golex exchange has soared more than $10,000, a 75% premium on global prices, as locals rush to protect their savings. But many international investors still view it as an opaque instrument used by gun runners and drug dealers on the dark web that should be avoided, and it's also a market from which foreigners are largely absent. Cryptocurrency as a whole is interesting because the allure is it's an unregulated, decentralized instrument. Now, with more exchanges emerging and the CME group listing futures, we could see new infrastructure emerge, and the derivatives at the very least will fall under some type of regulation. From the NASDAQ market site in New York, I'm Jill Malandrino, and this is Africa 54 Business News.
U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is hosting 37 African foreign ministers and the African Union here in Washington. Ambassador Donald Yamamoto, acting Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, spoke to me about the upcoming conference. In part two of our conversation, I asked him what the U.S. position is on African countries that are stable but yet repressive.
Find that governments that are accountable to its people are the governments that really survive. So you don't have crises, you don't have evacuation of foreign nationals or even refugee flows. And so this instability is caused by insecurity and other challenges, and these are the things that we're trying to help these countries address.
Now, recently, the main opposition leader of Kenya, Raila Odinga, was in Washington. One of the things he's saying is that the West seems to be just complacent with African nations being peaceful but nobody cares so much about the level of justice. Now, is there a feeling like sometimes the bar is set a bit low because of the history of the continent and such that countries like Ethiopia, Uganda and others can be given a pass as long as the country is together, is peaceful?
No, because instability in any one area is an instability in that region and has impact throughout the continent and also beyond the continent. So if we look at the interrelatedness of Africa to the world economy and also to world security, it's obvious. Look at the resources that Africa is providing developing countries, from China to Iran to Russia, even to other countries. That really underscores the importance of Africa in development.
People are concerned about the PEPFAR, for instance, program that started way back during the President Bush time, and there have been concerns of reduction of any kind of funding in the health area. What is the status of things now?
The fundamental issue is that health continues to dominate about 80 to 81% of total assistance levels to Africa. But I wouldn't call it assistance, I call it investments. And the reason why it's an investment, because it's investing in the future of Africa. And healthcare is really one of the major focal points that we have partnered with Africa on.
For some of our viewers, they would like to know how do you see the continent? Do you see it as one big block, or do you isolate some of the issues and address them according to regions and individual countries?
Yeah. So we look at it, first of all, prior to the ministerial, we're going to have a high-level dialogue with the African Union. So we look at the African Union as one means for addressing broad-based issues in all of Africa. Then we look at the sub-regional organizations, ECOWAS, SADC, EAC, IGAD, as another mechanisms, a means for addressing particular areas in the region. Then we look at other sub-regional groups like the G5, which is a security complement. Then we look at certain other aspects. So it's a very complex, very expansive approach, and it's not one size fits all, and it's not Africa is a large continent with 53 countries and very complex issues that goes from north to south, east to west to central, and we have to address each issue very carefully.
There are some who, whenever there's an issue, say South Sudan and other places, will say the U.S. has abandoned us, or the U.S. is not doing enough. What do you tell them?
Every area of insecurity and instability, again, affects not only the region but the entire continent and beyond. We address those very carefully. As you know, Ambassador Nikki Haley, our ambassador to the UN, just recently made a trip to South Sudan. We, as diplomats, have gone to South Sudan and Sudan and the regions very in concert to look at, see how we can address those problems.
How important is Africa as far as the U.S. foreign policy is concerned?
If you have a population, the largest continent in the world, but also 25% of the labor force is going to be African. And if you're going to have economic output at 500 billion today on manufacturing output, and it's going to be well over $1 trillion, that's an economic opportunity you cannot oversee. That has to be part of the calculus of anyone's economic development. And that's why we're so excited about expanding our relationship, not only just through AGOA, through investments, but also looking at how we can play a stronger partnership that's more dynamic and integrated and looks at every facet of the African, from societies to economies to politics to really the daily life, rather than just looking at the continent as a economic development plan. It's not. It's more complex, and the people of Africa deserve a much better deal, and that's the deal we're working on.
Ambassador Donald Yamamoto. Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. Mattel unveils its first ever hijab wearing Barbie. We'll be right back.
I'm Jeff Selden, and I work the National Security Beat. National Security Beat is anything that affects the national security of the United States, from counterterrorism to surveillance to even relations with Russia. It's one of the most fascinating beats you can have. It's probably one of the more important beats that you can cover because it touches on so many areas of the world, so many areas of people's day-to-day lives. I'm Jeff Selden, and my beat is national security.
Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. Mattel has unveiled its first hijab-wearing Barbie doll to honor an American Olympic fencer. Ibtihaj Mohammed held the Barbie doll made in her likeness as she attended the 2017 Glamour Women of the Year Awards at the King's Theatre in New York. Mohammed made history in Rio last year as the first U.S. Olympian to represent her country wearing a hijab. The hijab-wearing Barbie, produced by company Mattel, is part of Barbie's She-Ro line, which recognizes women who break boundaries to inspire the next generation of girls, and will go on sale in 2018. Well, next up at the Dubai Air Show, visitors are looking beyond the skies and to the stars. The UAE Space Agency is showcasing its Hope prop project that is aiming to send an unmanned spacecraft to the Red Planet by 2021. It's an ambitious plan. The space agency was only established 3 years ago in 2014, and the probe will have to begin its journey in 2020, traveling over 60 million kilometers in 9 months. If successful, it will be the first Arab and Islamic probe to reach Mars. Well, and finally,
on my way, I will get there. Step by step, I'm on my way.
Members of South Africa's SAF Gay Choir, the first of its kind in Africa, rehearse at their studio in Johannesburg. The choir was founded last year to stand up against violence and stigma towards the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community in the country. South Africa's constitution outlaws discrimination based on sexual orientation and is also the only country in Africa to legalize same-sex marriage, but activists say there is a lot of work to be done. Excuse me, choir leaders say they want to see the choir travel across the continent, spreading the message of pride. And that is what is trending today. Well, that's our show for today. Now be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC in the mornings, to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us here in Washington, have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. A plate is a dish that you put your food on.
Have a lot on your plate.
Hey Anna, I'm having a party this weekend. You should come.
I wish I could, but my weekend is really busy. I'm baking a wedding cake, writing my article, teaching 2 classes, and oh, my parents are visiting.
Wow, you have a lot on